Hi, welcome everyone. This is Take the Lead, Change the Game, a podcast for women leaders looking to deepen their knowledge and skills and find enjoyment in the process. We're powered by Software Leadership. Software Leadership is a cohort-based coaching experience designed to fuel courage and ignite impact among women professionals. I'm Mindy Gulati, and I'm here with my co-host Lindsay Goldford Gray and our special guest Belinda Roberts. We are the co-founders of Safra. Together, we're bringing a blend of leadership coaching, strategy, and lived experience to help women navigate challenges, seize opportunities, and lead with confidence. And we're thrilled to welcome Belinda Roberts as our guest today. Belinda is an attorney with more than 15 years of experience in litigation and legal practice. Her career has spanned child welfare law, the Attorney General's office, and service as a public defender on the mental health docket, giving her a broad and deeply practical perspective on the legal system. In addition to her litigation background, Belinda has worked extensively with technology startups, advising on operational infrastructure, growth strategy, and acquisition readiness. Her work uniquely bridges the worlds of law and the rapidly evolving technology. Building on that experience, Belinda is now launching a consulting practice, focused on helping law firms thoughtfully integrate artificial intelligence and emerging technologies into their operations. Her goal is to help firms streamline workflows, improve the quality of client services, and create more sustainable practices that give attorneys and staff valuable time in their demanding professional lives. And we're excited to have her here. Not only am I personally am fascinated with this topic. Lindsay and I talk about this a lot. And Belinda, we want to give you a lot of time today to sort of explore all of this, your areas of expertise and this topic. And I guess I just want to kick it off and ask you the first question: when did AI go from something that you were curious about to something that you started to rely on in your law practice and in your life?
Well, I think I started out with AI and my feelings about AI, probably much like most people did, which was kind of by being annoyed. I think it's important to be clear that my home life is steeped in AI. Like, we marinate in AI. My husband is a tech guy. He's an entrepreneur. And he has ADHD. So when you take entrepreneur energy and ADHD, that means like whatever he is on about right now, everybody in his orbit is going to hear about it 24/7. So he really started to get into AI around the time the pandemic started, and we were all at home. And I was his only audience for close to a year. He went from a guy that worked in the office all the time to being here at home. And I had worked from home as a lawyer, and he would come and lay on my couch and tell me about all the things he's learned. So I went from being curious to being annoyed. I'm like, is this all we're going to talk about? Is this what every discussion is going to be about? And yes, 6 years later, it is. But the interest is caught on with other people. So he's not the weirdo. We're not the weirdos anymore. And I think I went through a lot of the phases that most people have or are still going through. There's like annoyance, because that's all everybody wants to talk about. There's some fear. What does that mean for the future? We've had to have some conversations at home where I'm like, hey, we've got a high school age kid that hears that like AI is going to ruin his life and he's going to go to college and not have a job. Do you think we can not talk about this all the time in front of him?
Yeah.
While he figures out what it means for him. So I went through all of the stages. And over time I got curious, and I'm like, oh, he's finding that helpful. How can I find that helpful? Eventually he started an AI company, and so I got a little bit more interested in it as well. And then what really hit it for me with my legal practice, beyond just like, how can this be like a helpfully friendly tool, but how could this work with my AI or with my legal practice, was when his company made the switch from being a company that was building AI tools to a company that was using AI to build AI tools. Mm. And when in the last 12 months, when his programmers started actively using it, that's when I was like, Oh, what do you mean you've got an agent on your phone that you text and he just told you what he just finished with and you reviewed it while we were standing in line at the grocery store and told him what to do next?
Mm-hmm.
That is super.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I still don't entirely understand it. Like, I still feel like I'm definitely in the beginning phases because I'm not doing that at the grocery store.
Well, you also are not like a tech dude. They are their own breed.
Yeah.
And I mean, speaking of not being like tech dudes, I think the legal industry more generally tends to be on the slower end of adoption. And, you know, I think right now, what I'm seeing is a lot of people are kind of in the resistance fear phase. And so specifically with the fear piece, like, do you, as someone who sort of has gone through the stages, like, do you feel like the fear, what aspects of the fear are valid? And then what are some things that are sort of just panic, maybe that are not as warranted?
Well, I mean, I think that they kind of fall into two buckets. One is I'm going to use it wrong and it's going to get me into trouble. So therefore, it's easier to just dismiss it and say, I'm not going to use it because that seems scary and risky.
Yeah.
And where was I going with that?
So you were saying that for the fear-based, like in the legal practice, fear-based in terms of I'm worried I'm going to use it wrong. I assume you mean things like I'm going to accidentally upload client data, or I'm going to upload client data that can be seen, or waive privilege. And then there was another bucket.
But then there's the other bucket of they're talking about what role is this going to have within our work industries in general, right? And lawyers are a professional service. And we very much identify part of our beings. I think they kind of beat you into law school, right? You go into law school as a one person and you come out of law school as a slightly different person. And so part of our identity is being a lawyer. So when you're at a dinner party and somebody's like, are we even going to need lawyers, you know, in a couple of years, right? So then that feeds into the other fear, which gives the knee-jerk reaction of I'm just not going to do it, or I'm going to stick my head in the sand and pretend this isn't a thing, because that shakes my identity and my future.
That AI would ultimately make lawyers obsolete, or like largely obsolete. Is that
right? I think that's a fear. Absolutely. Right.
So then
those are the two fears, I think.
Of those, do you sense, like, what's your sort of broad scope assessment on the validity of those two fears?
I think that the bigger fear people should have is not learning it and what that can mean for your future. I mean, we have an ethical obligation to stay essentially like technology relevant. We have a duty to provide our client, you know, services that are in our client's interest. And that means if there's a way to save time, and our clients will eventually start demanding that. I mean, why would I pay for something that, you know, I could do with AI's help and still provide a really excellent product in 30 minutes versus something I edit by hand and spend 3 hours on, right?
Yeah, I'm hearing that a lot. My orbit is with a lot of primarily flat fee industry folks, and saying like, there's just no way that in 2 years from now, let's say, like that the fees that like the amount of hours spent on cases is going to go down substantially. Now the technological infrastructure is going to go up. And so like, what does that mean for lawyers?
Right. And I think it's happening at a faster curve. I mean, think about how the legal industry changed when we went from word processing, right?
Yeah.
And would you hire a lawyer that was like, I still use a typewriter?
Right. Probably not.
I just don't use email because I don't know how it works. You'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Belinda, I'm interested in knowing, because a lot of clients are using AI before they come into a lawyer's office. They're drafting briefs, they're drafting filings. How should attorneys be thinking about that aspect of AI use?
Well, I think it's not just they're drafting, then they're always like checking on your work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And I primarily only hear complaints, I will say, about that from lawyers. You get a group of lawyers together now that do direct client work. That seems to be a common discussion of kind of just how annoying it is. And most of the discussion seems to focus on how can we get clients to not do this?
Yeah.
So there's discussion of how can I change my client contract to discourage this behavior? How can I let them know how much more expensive it is going to be if they keep coming to me with their like ChatGPT generated stuff? And I think it's important to remember our clients were doing this before. They were just doing it with Google.
Yeah.
And Google didn't synthesize it. So they were just asking lots of questions versus like, here's a product that I want you to look at. So I think that attorneys, number one, need to stop feeling like that it's challenging their knowledge or challenging their authority or their client doesn't believe them. I think it's important to identify that as that means your client has questions.
Yeah.
I find what's more valuable than the input that they're giving me that Claude gave them is what did they put into Claude to get the answers? Because that's where you can identify the disconnects. That's where you identify how your client sees the world. That's how you can identify how your client sees and values their fact situation and what facts that they don't think are as important or as valuable, or where their emotion is about it all. You can also identify and start to tease out based on from that information what they see as an ideal solution and help them identify, you know, where you can settle between what their ideal solution is and maybe what they're legally entitled to for a resolution.
I really love that. And I just was scrolling my LinkedIn and I saw like a friend of mine from high school was talking about how he was using AI to code and that how it sort of hit him that like ultimately really the crux of any tool or service is like, what problems do people need solving? And that kind of, it goes to your point is like ourselves as lawyers or AI, it like none of it as is relevant without really understanding what people's pain points are and what their priorities and values and solutions that they want. So I really, really love that point.
I mean, it's a little sneak peek into what's going on in their brain that they've typed into, and then you can be like, oh, okay, well, I can see why I am seeing this differently than my client is seeing this, and how can we get on the same page about that?
Yeah, no, definitely. When you think about like, so we've, you know, there's attorneys alone, and then there's AI by itself, and then there's like what presumably is some kind of perfect match that blends both. So like when you consider like, I don't know if how much of both is the right question, but like how that marriage happens in a way that's like healthy and good and ethical and like what sort of comes to surfaces for you as like top things to think about?
Well, I think you still need to be an expert in your subject area. And I think that is very important, especially if you want to use these tools to their maximum value. And I think that that's where people kind of get off into the weeds and maybe get results from it that they're not happy with, or results that they're like, this is just garbage, it's not trustworthy, is based on how they are using it.
Do you mean like as an example of that sort of writing legal briefs, for example, like we've seen a couple of things where like AI is hallucinating case law, like
right.
Let's take that
I would
example.
never just tell ChatGPT or Claude to write me a brief.
Okay, so how would you do it?
I would start out with doing some legal research myself. And, you know, all of the legal research tools that we use already have a lot of AI tools built into them, right? And it depends on what tier and what level. There's like Harvey that does a whole bunch more. And then you've got, you know, Reuters that is now partnering with Anthropic, and Nexus has its own thing inside of it. So there's a lot of built in, but you need to have an idea of where you're starting from. You wouldn't like have an associate come in and be like, no context, just write me a brief on X.
Yeah.
Right. Or if you do, they'll come back several days later with something where you were like, oh, that's not quite where so I would start when I want something written, I have already maybe used it to help me identify what my sources are going to be, what supports it, what is like not supporting my argument. And then I give it all of the information that I want it to turn into a first draft.
Yeah. So you say like,
these are your sources.
Yeah. Yeah. Essentially, these are the facts. This is the law.
Correct.
Like,
yes.
Now we can look at a draft of a brief that we then review and edit either by hand or.
Yeah. And it's a combination of, sometimes I'm just like, oh, now that I'm reading that, I don't even need this whole section. Would you write it again and take this part out? Like in my head, I thought I needed it, but when I read it on paper, I don't take that out. And then I go back and do fine tuning. So I do first draft and then several drafts where my tool and I are having conversation kind of back and forth. And then usually once it's into a Word document, then I go through and make some changes as I see. But by that point, I'm already, I know what my law is. I've already determined, the sandbox with which I am working within. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't give it just a broad open sandbox. Yeah. Because that's how you get things that are not true. I think that'll get better with time, but.
Go ahead, Mindy.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think that's a helpful frame of like, don't just like go in with a specific purpose. I guess the question I have for you too is about time savings, because I think a lot of lawyers, but also just any busy professional could really probably find some ways to use AI to more effectively manage their calendar, their caseload. So when you work with attorneys, where do you typically find their time is going? And then are there patterns in busy professionals that you think AI could help out with?
So there's two of them that are like pretty universal. One is just email and basic communication management. I have mine set up that it sorts my email into most urgent. And when I bring it up, it also brings me up a prepared response that I can then start editing from. Like I have my little agent that does that, so that I am starting with a prepared response that I can then edit and change. So that's good to like shuffle through all of the, stuff that just kind of trickles in. The other one is like the consolidation of information. Usually attorneys are working on one case or one part of a case, and then they set it aside, and then they're coming back 2 weeks later and they're like, where was I? Right? Like, what was I thinking? Where were we working on? What was that last conversation I had from my client? What were my client's thoughts? Wasn't there an email? Where is that email?
Yeah.
Right? Like, where is my notepad that I know I wrote with purple ink on this left side of the page? Where is that? Right? So if you can use the tools to combine all that, and you can just ask, where did we leave off?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was I working on most recently? Why did we decide to take this strategy and not that strategy? And you can set it up to capture all of that.
Yeah. One of the things, Belinda, that you and I talked about, because I've been working on a software project. One of the things you really emphasize with me is like making sure that the documentation is set up. And obviously we don't want to go in now to all of that, but I think like the setup process can be so key, so that all of these things are captured depending on what project you're working on, so that things like voice, decision matrices, like all of these things are captured, and you can just be like, what do you want to work on today? Or, like sometimes that's my question, right? Like, what's next? And then I hear, well, you have these 5 things coming up on your task list. Which one do you want to tackle? Here's how much each task is going to take. And it's so fabulous.
Absolutely. And you can set and use agents to set up your practice and your workflow like that as well. It can be incredibly helpful for you to kind of stay on track. I mean, how many times have you sat down at your desk and you're like, what's the most pressing? Where, what? And you can spend sometimes, an hour just trying to figure out what you're supposed to be working on.
Yeah, definitely.
And in the legal field, that hour is not billable, where you're like, now where was I?
Yeah, for sure.
So, and I don't think so in the software context, the documentation that you use to kind of like lay your foundation can be in like lots of different documents, and it's like actually pretty quite complicated, but you can use the same sort of like structure on a much smaller scale, like for each case that you have going. That way you can very easily document summaries of emails or conversations you've had with clients, or, you spent that time in the shower really thinking about what you were going to do for this client. And, then you can put it into Claude and summarize it, and it'll be captured there.
Yeah. Yeah. So to give us an example, like let's talk through, one of the things I think we were talking about before we hopped on, I'm not sure it's made it into the conversation yet, I don't think it has, is like drafting emails or even drafting text messages or social media posts. Like when you think about, so let's say that you have a client where you need to write a somewhat difficult email with maybe news that they don't want to hear, for example, like how would you use AI effectively in that situation?
Well, I mean, I would use the same sort of kind of prompting that you would use with, when you were kind of initiating anything, right? So number one, I have a skill set up where my Claude agent has my voice, my tone. I have trained it up with a number of my emails. So it knows like, I don't typically type out Belinda when I sign off. And other things. And I have a tendency to write fairly casually. I found that approach works best for the clientele I've worked with over my career.
Yeah. And then do you give it all the information that you wanted to say and say, like, write this in my voice?
So I think it's important to say, because we haven't touched on this. The way I am using AI, I am using an enterprise paid for program that does not do model training, that I am paying for, that I know where the data is being stored, and I think that's important. So when I say I'm just, this isn't the free model, I'm not giving it client information, it's a free model, right? I have a policy and a system set up. So I would give it the email and be like, I'm responding to this email. And if it's not a response, if I have to, I'm initiating the conversation, I would give it like, it already knows who I am. But if you're starting fresh, you want to tell them, you're a lawyer. This is the kind of practice that you do. This is the type of email. This is the goal of my email. These are the areas where I think my client's going to push back or be upset about. Is this, and what is the purpose? Is this email just to convey information and that's it? Do I need them to make a choice? Do I need to give them options? And I also give them a little of information about my client's style. Like my client likes everything in bullet points and wants to mull it over and then have a phone call. Yeah, we have some clients that like that, right? Other clients want all of the information, and you will have a back and forth email exchange like till the end of time, right? So everybody's a little different. So you give that sort of context too, because then you can communicate with your client in the style that they prefer, which I don't think attorneys do enough. Think about their client's communication style. Yeah.
I want to jump to the data privacy stuff that you sort of alluded to. So like, talk to us. I mean, I think one of the biggest fears right now, especially with lawyers, is like, I don't want to violate. I mean, there was a case that came out recently that said attorney-client privilege was waived with the use of AI.
Well, I think that's an important case to talk about. So number one, there's very little case law, right? Very little case law.
Yes.
And that is a case that came out of the Southern District. There was one that came out of the Eastern District that had a different resolution, so it's split. But there's some important facts about that case. The information they were trying to protect was client created. So your client was on the model, a free or consumer level model, going through his strategy on how he would defend himself in this criminal case.
Okay.
And the government came upon all of this essentially it's like a search history. It's a conversation history because
Yeah.
they executed a warrant on his house and took all of his electronics, and there it all was, right? And so
Okay.
I think as attorneys made a good faith effort to try to bring it under attorney-client privilege. But it's the same sort of warning that we give our clients, you know, and your Google history is subject to being discoverable.
Yeah.
So is whatever you put into your AI model. And that is probably the only effective tool that you have to like reduce your clients' reliance, you know, for them bringing you things.
It's just to tell them,
Yeah.
But also, how many times do you tell clients, at least in my line of work, Jill, phone calls are recorded and listened to. Clients do what they want, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it's midnight and they're anxious about things and you're not available to answer all 50,000 of their questions, and Claude's right there. So that case, it said that attorney-client privilege wasn't waived. It wasn't even established. It was just your client talking to an AI model, and it had some really specific things in it. It was a consumer level model. It was used by a client, not by the attorney.
Okay. So then as attorneys,
there's so little case law we're trying to apply.
I know.
Yeah, we're lawyers. We want rules.
But of course, I'm going to ask you what rules you would follow.
There aren't any rules. There's guidance, because we've been taught to be lawyers. We take guidance and then we apply it. So there is the Texas Ethics Opinion 705 that talks about AI. There's also a great toolkit that the Texas Bar put together to help kind of give you a start for AI usage. Also, the American Bar Association has some great resources and talks a lot about best practices. And something probably most attorneys didn't know, but there is already a best practice. Best practices would be considered to have a technology policy for your firm to begin with, long before AI. Like, what's your goal? What are you using? What is the rules for you and your staff to be using it? I mean, those are things like, and a lot of small firms don't do that. Like, is, dual authentication required?
Yeah.
Like, if your legal assistant set it up on her own, who knows if she did? Is she just declining every time they say we want to set up that two-factor authentication? Is she just saying no every time? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's the rule or policy on like client documents? If they're in Dropbox, is your staff allowed to access that from any old computer anywhere if they can just log in? What's your policy on that? So you have to take your office policy and now expand it and be intentional about how you intend that to use AI. What's your goal? What's your intention? How are you going to use it? How are you evaluating what is safe and what is not safe? And it seems to me that with AI usage, it feels as though they want people just want the standard to be a little higher than it was. Like, nobody was thinking about Dropbox or Google Docs. Is that safe? I don't know. We've learned that Google seems to be using all our information for all the things. I don't know too many law firms that have moved away from using, Google Workspace underneath the covers, but we also know that, there's probably some concerns there. So you just have to decide, like, what is your threshold and where are you? Like, I bet a lot of firms that use Dropbox, for example, are not paying for the highest tier that has, end-to-end encryption.
Right.
But the rules aren't clear. End-to-end encryption maybe isn't required because there isn't there aren't rules that say this is what's safe. You have to decide based on what's available and what is reasonable.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of times like consumer level or free tier where you're not paying, or how the model is trained. Are there some like baseline? Like, I've heard if it's going to be trained, if your data is going to use to train the AI, like, that is probably not safe as an attorney.
Yeah, for sure. That's not safe, because that means what you're putting out there, they can take and use it for whatever they want. And that's how they can afford to offer free level or very low level services. And I can only really speak to like the details of like the various tiers with Anthropic's product, Claude, probably the best.
Mm-hmm.
But like they have their free version that anybody can just hop on their web browser and use, right? And so that is just, you are shouting it to the ether. Like no expectations of privacy. You are standing on the top of the mountain and you are yelling it to everybody. Who's to say? And then they have some consumer levels that are a couple of consumer levels. On the consumer levels, you can turn off the model training. That is an option that they provide. And some people may be comfortable with that and feel like that's enough for them. There isn't any sort of contractual obligation for them to not use your data. That is kind of a promise they're making to you at that level. And then they have a teams level and an enterprise level. And those are the more professional realms. And those, they just don't. There is no option to turn on model training. They just don't train models. And then there's some other like questions of like, do you want it to keep a memory and that sort of thing.
Let me ask you a question. I think that's helpful for lawyers and leaders and busy professionals, because you mentioned like the AI agents to do. Can you, for those of us who don't totally understand that or know like how to get started with something like that, because I feel like that would be helpful for a lot of people to learn how to build an agent and have that. Like, what does that look like for the novice, for someone who's dipping their toe in the water?
Unless somebody is fairly comfortable with technology, that might be something that folks want help establishing.
Okay.
And it's not something you need help with on a regular basis, but to like decide what you're trying to get it to solve and or what tasks you want it to do. They call them skills. I try to not use too much jargon. But what sort of tasks you want it to do. And that's the difference between using AI as more of like a chat feature where it's responsive to you, and to taking it kind of to the next level where it also reacts and it can do things. Like it can take your client intake forms and set up a whole new case matter in Clio. Like you can get it to do that automatically. You can then have it take that information and create a client contract with your client contract template. And, those are skills that you can set off. And I mean, there's a lot of tools out there. There's like lots of YouTube videos. You're comfortable reading Reddit. I know Lindsay's made her own software. And I think that probably just started with like, how do I make a software, application? And the tools are out there. You just kind of have to look for them. I think most people don't start it with something that's a plan, like a problem they're trying to solve. I think most folks jump into AI. We're just like, oh, I'm going to just ask ChatGPT what it thinks. And if you're doing that, that means people in your firm are doing that too.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of informal use of AI in law firms now where people are using it, but there is not policy around how to use it. And so it's similar to like the client bringing you, or sending you AI's thoughts. I think that we have to just assume that in many cases, employees of law firms are using it as well. And so instead of trying to say like, no, resist, like really understanding how do we do this well?
I mean, it's impossible to resist. It's just sitting right there. You just type it in and it comes up on your browser. I mean, so a policy is important so they know how and when they can use it. I think it's also important for employees to know that if you are using an enterprise account and you've got personal questions, that maybe you should save those for your own personal account, because, at least with the Anthropic's products, the administrator can, pull that and see what the employees have been working on.
Good to note. Well, before we wrap up, I want to ask you if you could give your younger self, so this can be AI related or not, one piece of advice, what would you tell your younger self?
That's a great question. So I was first generation college student in my family. I didn't know I don't think anybody in my family even considered that they had a career. They had jobs, and those are jobs that they didn't even usually pick. Mm-hmm. So I had the opportunity to go to college, and then I had the opportunity to go to law school. And in law school, I really felt like a fish out of water. I had to explain to my family why I didn't go to law school right from high school, like that's not the way it's done. Just like, why are you being so inefficient? Why are
going
you
to college first and then law school?
Right. Like nobody, Yeah. So by the time I got to law school, I was surrounded by what felt like people that came from much more professional backgrounds, whose parents and uncles and aunts and family members had professional careers. And a lot of them came from, lawyers' families, because it seems like we reproduce ourselves. So I think the best piece of advice I could have given myself in law school was to find a mentor that I would feel comfortable sharing how out of place I felt. I think that I would have come out of law school with a much better plan and more direction. But instead, I kind of tried to hide.
Yeah. That's really good advice. I do feel like in today's world, right? Like there are
programs.
Yes. And not to say like they don't fit everyone, but it's different, I think.
But if your school has that program, participate in that program. Like, definitely. Because I don't think, well, even my husband, he's like, I'm self-made. And I'm like, you grew up in Westlake and got your first funding because you knew kids' parents who were, venture capitalists. Like, like, sure, you were, and you weren't. And, folks, when they're going into a more professional setting, a lot of times folks already have kind of a leg up just because of who they know and contacts and how to navigate things. And if you're first generation, you're having to catch up. So use those resources. And if there aren't any, find some resources. It didn't even occur to me.
Yeah. Anything else from you, Mindy? Any more questions?
No, I think I think it's been fascinating. I guess, give us all like a 30-second pep talk in that we've got this, because you've been growing up in this family since COVID. So for a lot of people, this is new. So what do you have to say to folks who aren't technologically savvy, who are sort of behind the ball? I hear a lot of fear in like the work that I do of just like overwhelmed. Give us a pep talk.
I think you just need to start using it. And if you're just going to dabble in it, at least get a consumer level that you're paying for, turn off the training data model situation, and don't put like client identifying information in there. But that doesn't mean that you can't start to use it. Because I think one of the things that can be so fascinating to learn so quickly is how like the first couple of times I used it, I didn't get what I was looking for. But now, like, just within a couple tries, you're like, oh, I know when if I tell it this, and this, give it this, I get more of what I want. So I think it's something you have to play with to get comfortable with. There isn't going to be like a pill that we can take and be like magically AI literate.
Yeah,
for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know that we had a number of people watching live, and I'm sure more people will be hopping on and checking it out later. So thanks. We really, really appreciate your time. This is such an important topic.
All right. Thanks a bunch. Have a good day.
Awesome. Thanks.
Bye.